Hi there. Today's video is about it's for beginner guitarists. It's basically about how to form the kind of 5 basic open chords on a guitar when you first learn to play a guitar. So as you can see on my guitar, I have got the chords on as dot stickers. These are called 8mm stationary dot stickers. You can buy them from Amazon or any reputable retailer. And I started using them with my ukulele club, and I just find it's an easy shorthand way of showing people what the shape of the chords are and how to form them. And also you've got a reference on the guitar, so when you're putting your fingers on the dots, you don't have to refer to any other image or whatever to work out what it is you're supposed to be playing. Now, once you start off with a guitar, when you first start playing the acoustic guitar, well, the guitar in any form, but especially the acoustic guitar action tends to be fairly high, so I find that, you know, a sustained period of time playing on my guitar tends to lead to my fingers feeling a little bit kind of raw. If I'm playing a full concert on the acoustic guitar, which I do in my folk band, it does take its toll. It's certainly a lot slower than playing on an electric guitar, and when you're a beginning guitar, you're going to find that that is going to be an issue. But you have to remember that your fingers will just toughen up as time passes. It'll get less sore. And it's just a stage that you have to go through in order to learn the guitar. So if you get sore fingers at the end of a session, think of it as a badge of honour. You've been working hard. The second thing to say is when you're making the chords, you need to use the very tips of your fingers. So if you have long nails on your left hand, you might find that's going to make life quite difficult for you. I certainly try and keep my nails very short. Now, obviously, you have people like Dolly Parton who seems to be able to play the guitar with extremely long nails. But the reason you're using the tips of your fingers when you're forming the chords is because if you're trying to use the flatter parts of your fingers slightly down from the tips, your fingers are kind of flattened out and will kill the strings that you're not playing on the chord. Now, I suppose that's actually what I should have started off is by explaining what we mean by an open chord. So an open chord is a chord that's played on the guitar where some of the strings do not have any fingers on them and they ring out as open strings. I should have tuned my guitar before I started. So that's why they're called open strings, as opposed to, say, a bar chord where you're using your fingers to hold down every note in the chord. So what we're utilising is obviously the notes that are the open strings. So the open strings on a guitar are E, A, D, G, B, E. Now a good mnemonic I found for this is Eddie, 8, Dynamite, Goodbye, Eddie. So E, A, D, G, B, A. Eddie, 8, Dynamite, Goodbye, Eddie. So obviously if you're using the open strings, it means that those notes are in the chords that you're playing. So for instance, the blue chord on my guitar is an E major chord, and both the E string and the B string and the high E string are notes that are in that chord, so you can play them open. And when you're playing open chords, the idea is you want to be able to obviously hear the strings that you're holding down. So you're holding the strings, you're pushing down hard enough on the strings to make good contact, but you're also not, your hand isn't interfering with the open strings, so you're getting a muted string. So again, why you're using your tips. And also with that said, now a classical guitarist, when they learn to play guitar, is taught it's important to have a proper position for your hand, which would be for your thumb to be on the back of your guitar and your wrist to be dropped down like this for proper kind of, you know, classical guitar playing. Most acoustic guitar players just flip their thumb over the top because it's kind of more comfortable, but that still means you can use this part of your hand to squeeze. So you're going to have to squeeze the back of the guitar neck with that part of your hand, the pad of your sort of thumb and across here, to get the force you need to press down so you can fret the notes so that they are clear. Now, fretting the note would mean playing as close to the metal frets that are on the guitar as you can get. So if you're playing on the 2nd fret, you don't want your finger to be here at the back of that far away from the fret. You want it to be right up close to the fret wire, but obviously not on top of the wire, because when you press down on the string, it's the wire that is creating the part of the string that vibrates. So obviously when you pluck an open string, the entire string vibrates. When you're holding down a fret, the string only vibrates from the fret to the end of the guitar. So as you move your finger up the guitar, you're shortening the string and you're getting higher notes. Now, I think the next thing I'd like to say is that when you're learning to play chords, you really want to do it often. So if you're finding it, I mean, it's not going to be a particularly enjoyable thing to do, especially before you're at the stage where you're learning chords and you're not really able to change them fast enough to play along with songs and things like that. So really, if you can do it, if you were to do it 10 minutes a day, do it every day, over a certain amount of time, you will pick up the skill of playing the chords. And it's inevitable that you'll get that, but the secret is to not get discouraged by the fact it takes a while for it to happen. And obviously, if you did it 20 minutes a day, it would take less time overall, the more you did it every day. But the important thing is to do it regularly, as often as you can. So you'd be better off doing it 5 minutes every day than an hour once a week, say, or something like that. And there's nothing to stop you from just practicing making the chord shapes on your guitar when you're not playing it. So say you're sat watching telly or something like that, you know, there's nothing, you don't have to be strumming the guitar to be forming the shapes. Now, what you're trying to achieve is the ability to make a shape in the whole. So not coming at a chord, say, with one finger and then having to think and then put the other fingers on. Though that is the stage you're going to have to go through to get to the point where you can change chords. So when you first start out, you're probably having to place down your fingers individually, whereas once you've practiced it a bit, you can make the chords instantly. Now, there's a really good video on YouTube, which if I put up just now, a search term that you can type into YouTube, the first video you get up, which is called The Human Mind, has a short video by a scientist called Robert Winston explaining how your brain makes connections. And the analogy he uses is building a rope bridge between two peaks on a hill. And the idea that at first it's shaky, it's tentative, it's not very strong, but if you repeatedly go back over the same process, the connection gets stronger and stronger. Now, I think more modern thinking thinks that there's something to be said for a little pause after a session. So say you spent 50 minutes playing chords. At the end of it, if you spent 5 minutes just sitting in your chair, maybe close your eyes, sit there, do nothing, apparently what your brain does is your brain goes over what it's been rehearsing even though you're not doing it. So although your fingers are no longer trying to form the chords, the brain connections are still firing around the idea of what it is you've been doing. Now, I have to say that this is a phenomenon I noticed when I was playing in an AC/DC tribute band and I was trying to learn guitar solos, was that there would always come a stage where I was kind of getting quite close to knowing the solo. I was able to play bits of it, but I wasn't confident enough to play it all the way through. And it always makes a difference if you're trying to play something in front of people. So even if you can play it in your house comfortably, when you get in front of an audience, even if it's just the audience of your band members, it tends to make it that little bit harder. There would be a point where I would kind of leave it for a few days and come back and it just seemed to fall into place. And that happened often enough. I was aware of that as a phenomenon before I read anything about the brain and the idea of having a kind of a pause time after you have worked on something intensely so that your brain is just able to kind of firm up the connections it's making. So all these things will help you to get better at making chords. And the last piece of advice I'd give you, which is one I've come across quite recently, is do this finger last. Most of us are right-handed, and even if you're left-handed, you're going to play the guitar this way round. So you use your non-main hand as the hand that makes the plays the chords. Your right hand strums and your left hand forms the chords. Now this finger is the finger, the left-handed finger for right-handed people that we have the most control over. And there's a tendency when you're forming a chord to start with the first finger and then you kind of relax a bit and think, oh yeah, made it, I've got my first finger on. And then you start trying to get the second and third fingers on, and that's the hard part. And that can be quite demoralizing. So I saw a video recently that suggests that what you should do is concentrate when you're playing them on putting your second and third fingers, and especially your pinky if your pinky's involved in the chord. It's not involved in many chords, but there are some open chords that do use your pinky, because these are the fingers that are going to take the most amount of work. So put your first finger on last. So if I was, say, doing the red chord on here, which is an A chord, and it's 3 dots in a row, put the second and third dots on with the second and third fingers and then come in with the first finger last, so that your brain is focusing on the fingers that are the hardest fingers to fret at the beginning. So with all that said, let's have a look at the chords that we've got on here. Now I've got a blue chord, that's an E chord, a red chord, that's an A chord, a yellow chord, that's a D chord, a pink chord, that's a C chord, and a green chord, which is a G chord. Now there is another chord in this pattern here, but we'll come to that one at the end. So let's start off with the blue chord, the E chord. So we're starting off with our first finger on the first fret of the G string. So remember, Eddie ate dynamite, goodbye Eddie. So G string is this string here, that's your first finger. You then put your second finger on the second fret of the A string, and your third finger on the second fret of the D string. Now you want to try and get, obviously because your finger here are angled, it's going to be this finger that's closest to the fret, but you want to get this finger behind it fairly close, and again with your first finger make sure it's close to the fret. So if we're fretting that properly, you would do 2 and 3 first, then put on 1. Now what you're looking for is, first of all, the strings that you're holding down are ringing out, and the strings that you're not holding down are also ringing out. If you find that some of your strings are muted, it means your fingers are, excuse me, resting on the string. The fingers that are playing the notes are resting on the strings that you're not supposed to be playing notes on, generally down to the fact that you're not using the very tips of your fingers. So try to use the tips of your fingers when you're pressing down. So that's an E major chord. Now, it's got 6 strings obviously, guitar, but there are only 3 notes in that chord. E, B, E, G sharp, B and E. So the 3 notes of an E major chord are E, G sharp and B. The next chord is an A chord, that's the red chord here. Now it's on diagonally because when you try and put 3 fingers in a row on the guitar, they're going to just naturally make a diagonal shape. But remember, you're doing your second and third first. So your third finger should be close to the fret and the other 2 sit behind it. So you're starting off, well, I'll take them in order. So your first finger goes on the second fret of the D string, your second finger goes on the second fret of the G string, and your third finger goes on the second fret of the B string. But obviously when you're making that chord, try and remember second and third first, followed by the first finger. Second and third fingers, first finger. And again, you want them all to ring out like that. Now the next chord would be our yellow chord, D chord. That's a 5-string chord. It means that the bottom string, your E, does not go with that chord. It's not part of the chord. Oh, sorry, for the A chord, your notes are E, A, C sharp, E. So the 3 notes of an A chord are A, C sharp and E. That might come in handy later on. So for your D chord, you are on the second fret, first finger on the second fret of the G string, second finger on the second fret of the high E string, this Eddie, not this Eddie, and your third finger on the third fret of the B string. But obviously, again, if you're fretting that, do your second and third fingers first, then your first finger, and you play the top 5 strings. So starting on the A string. And those notes are A, D, F sharp. So the notes of a D chord are A, F sharp, and D. Now the next chord is my pink chord, that's a C chord. Excuse me. This one tends to also be a little bit more difficult because it's a stretch. This chord is all on 1 fret, this chord's on 2 frets, this chord's across 2 frets, this chord spreads across 3 frets, so you have to sort of spread your fingers out again. So I'd say for a beginner, this is possibly one of the harder chords to learn to play. So you start off with your first finger on the first fret of the B string, you've got an open E, first fret of the B, open G, second fret of the D string, third fret of the C string. You don't play the bottom note. There is a version of C with 4 fingers, where you also include the third fret of the bottom E string, but for now we're going to concentrate on this version, so that's only 5 strings. Now it's quite easy for this finger to get caught up in that bottom string. So again, try and make sure that you're using the tips and that your nails are nice and short. But again, if you're fingering it properly, it would be second fret, third fret, and then first fret on. And a 5-string chord. And the final chord of the ones that are dotted on the guitar, but we still have a mystery chord to do, is the G. Now the G is difficult because it's a big stretch, not across the frets, but across the strings, because you're playing the bottom E string and you're playing the top E string. You're playing the A string, but the 3 in the middle are open. So if your fingers are at a funny angle or you haven't got them fretted properly, you could be killing these open strings. So you start off with your first finger on the second fret of the A string, your second finger on the 3rd fret of the bottom E string, and your 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the top E string. And all the ones in between are open. Well, I should have said the notes of a C chord are C, E, G, C, E. So C and G. Notes of a C major chord. This is a G major chord. G, B and D. G, B and D. In fact, they're all major chords, apart from mystery chord, which we'll get to next. So that gives us 5 chords. E, the blue chord. A, the red chord. They're both 6-string chords. D, 5-string chords, so you don't play the bottom string. C, 5-string chords, so you don't play the bottom string. And G, 6-string chord, you do play the bottom string. Now the other chord that's in here is E minor. And E minor is, well, that's E major. E minor, you're only changing one note. You're changing this G sharp note down to a G. And it gives you this kind of, the idea is that majors are happy and minors are sad. But it's just one note difference. So to play that, and in terms of developing good habits, we're just going to use the same fingers we would normally use for these dots when we're playing the major chord. We're just going to take this finger off. So you're using your 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the A string, and your 3rd finger on the 2nd fret of the D string. Now that chord is useful because along with G, C and D, you could probably play 75% of nearly every song that's ever been written. And there are too many of them to go in here, but trust me, that is a very common chord progression. So with that said, hopefully there's enough information there to get you started. Take your time. You know, everything about learning, because I'm a teacher, everything about learning to do things is about switching off an emotional response and not getting frustrated with yourself when it's difficult. Just having the right beginner mindset so you know it's going to be difficult. Not terrible, not like, you know, really difficult, but you're going to have a stage where you're going to find it difficult. Just be good to yourself. Don't beat yourself up about that fact. Just be patient, work at it steadily, and guaranteed, say you watch this video, it's October now, if you did this every day for 15 minutes or 10 minutes, by Christmas you'll be playing these chords fairly well. And obviously over the years these things will become second nature to you, but you do have to get through this stage of learning to play the guitar. So that's why it's called Beginner's Guide to Chords. Okay, I hope that helps.